and I think it will be a tremendous springboard for the conversation that we are about to have. The Grizzlies and the National Civil Rights Museum are proud to share with you tonight a conversation that we are having here at the museum and is being streamed live on Grizzlies.com on the issues of social justice and sports. What we'd like to see happen is addressing the urgent need of closing the opportunity gap for young people in Memphis. And how can we do this? We can do this by providing mentorship, by providing some after-school programming and other services that will help prepare young people in Memphis to be successful going on from high school to college and for the rest of their lives. After our conversation with our distinguished panel, we are going to unveil a brand new Grizzlies uniform, which you see shrouded over here. It is being called MLK 50. The uniform will be worn for the first time when the Grizzlies take on the Chicago Bulls on January the 15th at our annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration game. It will also tip off the National Civil Rights Museum's remembrance of the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination here at the historic Lorraine Motel. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel for tonight's conversation. First of all, starting with the head coach of our Memphis Grizzlies, Coach David Fizzdaale. Coach Fizzdaale is passionate about social justice and providing opportunities for young people. If you have not read the excellent article done by Mark J. Spears on the Undefeated website, in which he interviewed Coach Fizz, and Coach Fizz talks about growing up in South Central LA and talking about being there during the Rodney King riots, I certainly urge you to read that to give yourself some background and to understand exactly where Coach Fizzdaale comes from. It's very, very important, I think, to understand. Next, we're happy to have number 15 back, Vince Carter. Vince, we're thrilled to have you in Beale Street Blue. I've been covering the NBA for almost 25 years, and if there's a guy that I can say that I really admire and respect as a professional basketball player, it's Vince Carter. He is the epitome of a true professional, both on and off the court. On the court, he's a tremendous teammate, takes care of his body, refines his game, and off the court, he is socially conscious and active in the local community, and we're thrilled to have him on both counts. I'd also like to introduce part of our ownership group and a pillar of the community here in Memphis, Pitt Hyde. Now, Coach Fizz and Vince, I don't know if you know this, but back in the day, Pitt was one of the local businessmen who spearheaded the effort called NBA Now to bring the franchise to Memphis. And Pitt and his Hyde Family Foundation have been tremendous supporters of a number of philanthropic efforts here in Memphis, not the least of which is this museum and then also the symposium which we have in conjunction with the annual King Day game. Also want to introduce the president of this amazing, amazing museum, Terri Freeman. She's the president of the National Civil Rights Museum. I tell people who come to Memphis, if you don't come to this museum, you are making a tremendous mistake. And if you go home and you haven't been here, you need to come back. And with that, Terri, I'm going to turn the conversation over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Pete. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming out. This is, I think, a really apropos topic, social justice and sport, particularly given everything that we're seeing right now. You know, I was reading a Facebook post and somebody said, okay, so we're going to have a camera on everybody who takes a kneel during the National Anthem now after the NFL games. And I think it's interesting because athletes have always used their celebrity to make statements about what's going on in the community. So what we're seeing today is not that different than what we have seen in the past. Let's jump into this. First off, I should let you all know it's our 25th anniversary this year. We are pleased to be 25 years old, and Pitt Hyde was there at the very beginning.
I hate to admit it, but before I decided to head up the pursuit group to try to get a team from Memphis, I'd only been to one professional basketball game. I was more of a college fan, but we have had a long history, as everyone knows, about outstanding basketball players and fans that have always been so supportive of basketball. And also, I was convinced that it was the unique kind of sports team that would really bring the community together. And of course, the thing that gratifies me the most is since our very opening game, it's been the most diverse crowd from the rafters all the way down to the floor. And it's such a unity builder. Everybody's having a great time. Everybody's, pulling for the same great team. And yes, I think it's been a huge unifier, and I think it's also been a great sense of pride for our community, and to have something to really cheer about and get behind. And of course, then if you look at it from a practical point of view, the amount of exposure you get from a professional sport is just amazing. So, the combination of all those factors, but actually the primary motivator was about the unifying factor, and then how it would get everybody pulling together for the same great team.
Well, a part of that racial healing, I'm sure, was the development of the MLK game. And I know you were involved in that as well. 14 years later, we see that the game isn't being played on King Day, but there still is a game that weekend. What do you think about that change?
Well, it's a mixed reaction. Of course, I mean, the history of the game is really that, in talking to David Stern, we convinced him that this was the right and appropriate thing to do. So really, I mean, we were the first ones that initiated celebrating, having a basketball game to celebrate King's Day and a King Day. And of course, that spread throughout the league and all. Unfortunately, it just so happened with the change in the TV contract and the scheduling and all, it turned out there usually was like 6 games on that day. This year there's only 2, and you get into this audience stuff. So, but I think the way we've adjusted the programming and the schedule will turn out fine. But I hope Memphians don't feel like we've been slighted in the process. I mean, we certainly think we're the most appropriate place and the place that where it should be celebrated. And of course, we intend to do that.
Absolutely. Coach Fizzdale, do you have any thoughts about that, or the change?
Yeah, actually I do, because the one thing I am excited about with the change is it gives us an opportunity to serve. We're going out into the community that next day when usually the game is being played, and we're going to do what Dr. King set out for everybody to do, is get out there and serve the community. And so instead of playing a basketball game, we're going to get our hands dirty, and our team is going to get out there, and we're going to do everything we can to show people how important this day is.
That's great, and I think that, in fact, the Grizzlies have been a team that does that are part of the community.
I want to say to that, we consider that this MLK game our game.
That's right.
You understand? Like, in the locker room, like, this is our game, regardless of what day it's played on. MLK, you know that this is our game. This is where it's played. So, coming here before that, you knew about the game. You see it. You know, you look on the schedule because there's so many games. But now that being a part of it, like, this is our game. We know MLK game, where it's going to be played. Yeah, everybody else is playing it. They're just being a part of it. But this is the foundation. It's right here.
So that's great from your perspective as a player, and you've seen changes over the years. Anything stand out to you? I mean, do you think that moving to this type of a format where you actually do have a day of service on King Day is a positive addition?
We have so many young guys coming in NBA that aren't knowledgeable about a lot of things.
Yeah.
History in general. We laugh, but we're
But it's the
serious.
truth.
And we talked about, we've had this conversation together, but I tell young guys now, and I sound like a parent, but at the same time, it's like, you want to become an NBA player, learn your craft, for one. Understand the city that you're playing in. Learn a little bit about it. Understand what makes that city special. And I think it's very important. I think young men will value their job and value the city that they're playing in because of it. And as I've gotten older and still in this league, I see less of that. You see guys really not understanding who paved the way for you to be able to play basketball in this league, to have the opportunity to be drafted and make these millions of dollars. Just understand that, not just NBA-wide, just in your city, in your team. I think that's very important, and it may seem small and not important to these guys, but I think you have more of appreciation to wear that uniform in the city that you're in. And I think coming here, I've played on now, this is my 16th, but I have an appreciation for wearing this uniform here in Memphis, and because of the great history and what it's about. I mean, my friends, my family have all been in this building right here. And they all walk with my daughter, 11 years old. She's been here. She understands what it's about. He's asked me, can we go again?
We'll bring
Because
her back.
she was, right? But she enjoys it, and I just think it's important. You have more appreciation about who you are as a person. It doesn't really matter of your race
Right.
and who you are, male or female. It's the importance about the history, like you're a part of history, sitting here right now.
Pitt?
Well, yeah, I think it's, it's certainly, we need to point out that the great thing about the Grizzlies and the players in particular is not only on that day, but they've been so engaged in the community. And in fact, it was a couple of years ago, we were voted the #1 of all sports teams, not just basketball, as far as, the foundation and the giving back to the community and the involvement. So, the team has had a long history of really being engaged in the community and supporting so many worthy causes in our community.
And I think that probably also bodes really well for that diverse group that you were talking about being at the games, at every game, because the Grizzlies are a part of this community. The past several years have been pretty difficult. There have been some tough years, particularly as it relates to race relations in our nation and the relationship that communities of color have with police officers and more broadly the justice system in general. The killing of Trayvon Martin and the trial verdict of not guilty was really a moment that catalyzed what I call a new movement. And the Black Lives Matter movement was birthed just by a couple of young women who said, Black lives do matter. It makes a difference. And I think that for them, they did not see the term freedom and justice for all as being equally distributed. And I think it's interesting that the fact that we had to actually qualify the term Black Lives Matter, it says a lot about where we are as a nation, because I'm certain had we said women's lives matter, nobody would have asked us to qualify that. I think if we had have said blue lives matter, nobody would have asked us to qualify that. But for whatever reason, when we said Black Lives Matter, that was important. This summer was particularly difficult, and I think probably everybody in this room remembers that week. A week where we saw far too many deaths because of violent action. And I'm going to call everybody's name because everybody was important. The shooting deaths of Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and the 5 police officers in Dallas who were Lauren Aarons, Michael Kroll, Michael Smith, Brent Thompson, and Patrick Zamarripa. Now, in America, in every city, every day, not every city, but we have at least this many people that die. But this was particularly difficult because of the way things occurred. That very same week, Carmelo Anthony spoke out against the violence on Twitter. And he was joined by LeBron, Chris Paul, and Dwayne Wade on stage at the ESPYs. 2 days later, our own Mike Conley made his announcement of a $1 million gift to the Grizzlies Foundation to support young people in our poorest communities here in Memphis. And during the same period, Coach Fizzdale, you did an interview with the Undefeated.com in which you recounted your story about growing up in South Central Los Angeles in the 1990s. Talk to us a little bit about how your experiences have made you who you are and how you go forward now.
Well, I was talking to guys on the tour just now, and the shaping of who I am now started well before basketball. My grandfather grew up in Starksville, Mississippi, and most of my family is from Mississippi. So he started off with me at a young age on educating me on what's going on in the country and just making me understand how civil rights and human rights are important. And if I ever was put in a position to impact that it was my duty to step forward despite the critics and to have a voice about it and to get involved. And so growing up in Los Angeles, obviously I saw a lot. I saw a lot of violence, black on black crime. I saw a lot of police brutality. I saw a lot of economic despair. And as I went through that, I tried to absorb as much as possible. And I tried to be in tune with everything that was going on around me as a young man. And I think once I experienced the riots and the not guilty verdict after we saw on video camera a black man being beaten in the streets by multiple police officers for speeding. I think that is when the switch went on with me. And I wasn't the type of guy that was going to go out and protest violently. That just wasn't who I was. That wasn't who my family raised me to be. But right then I knew at some point I was going to have to get involved. And to see my neighborhood destroyed, to see as I'm driving down the 110 freeway, South Central LA catching fire, coming from a spring league game. The riots literally started 5 blocks from my high school at Tom's Liquor. And that's where you see on video Reginald Denny being hit with the brick. And basically that is where it all transpired. So it was very close to home. And so, you know, my mom always reminded me of my promise to my grandfather. And unfortunately, my grandfather fell to gun violence on our front porch. As tough as the old man was, he chased him off and, you know, threw a rock through the windshield. And he collapsed there. But I just kept seeing these things happen. And I said, you know what, when my time comes, you know, I'm going to jump in with both feet. And we were just saying, some things are just meant to be. You know, I never thought I'd come to Memphis. But for me to come here this summer, during this time, to be a head coach for the first time, you can't tell me that wasn't meant to be. For Dwayne Wade to go to Chicago, where I mean, I would have bet my salary that Dwayne Wade would have retired a Miami Heat basketball player. But for him to all of a sudden go to Chicago during the worst time in the city's history, and then his cousin falls to gun violence, that's meant to be. And so we're being called to our duty. And I think that, you know, with guys like Vince, Mike Conley, you know, other guys on our team who this is deeply affecting, I think it's time for us to step forward.
Talk a little bit about the fact that you have 15 young men that you, and trust me, I mean young when I say young. But you have 15 young men that are, you know, really under your care in a lot of ways, right. With regard to the amount of time that you're spending with them. And in fact, many of them are very vulnerable to some of the exact things that we see happening in the streets every day. How do you talk to them about what's going on and making sure that they are able to kind of stay above the fray, if you will?
Well, one, I try to educate them. I try to give them all of the understanding and knowledge that I possibly can give them, whether it's something that I understand or know, or whether it's people that I can bring in to speak to them and help them go through this process of what's going on in today's world. You know, a lot of the things they're going through right now, I went through it, and this was 20 years ago. You know, and it's shameful for us as a society to still be going through this. So I try to mentor them. I try to talk to them as much as I can about their duty to their communities, no matter what color you are, because this is affecting all of us. You know, whether you want to hide from it or not, it's at all of our doorsteps. And it's on all of us to get actively involved. So I just try to, you know, really give them a clear understanding of what's happening right now so that they don't make a wrong decision, you know, or make a decision out of emotion instead of out of real understanding, you know. And it's very interesting to me, you know, how this Colin Kaepernick thing is starting to transpire and how he's receiving so much criticism for nonviolent protests for a community that he comes from, and he has family members that are being impacted directly. And you notice that all of the critics that come out are usually people that aren't being impacted by that, or people that don't understand it. And they're talking about, this is a distraction to my team, or I'm not going to play that guy tonight if he protests. You don't get it. And so it's on us to make them get it and make them understand what these young guys are standing up for. And it's bigger than the sport. It's bigger than a basketball game. It's bigger than a football game. It's about people's rights. It's about equality. And so when I talk to these guys, I try to make sure that they understand they have a powerful platform, but do it right and do it with thought.
Exactly. Vincent, you are the elder statesman. You do have a mentoring role that you play with these young men.
And I want to piggyback on what Coach is saying, because yes, he sits and talks to us, and we educate each other. We help each other along the way. You know, like we say, it takes a community to raise a village. It's the same thing, you know, in a locker room, because we have a lot of young guys who are really now stepping into the world of a lot of money and a lot of free time, and a lot of opportunity. So we can go about things so many different ways, which sometimes you take the wrong turn, you just down the wrong path, put you in the wrong situation. So we just have to help each other. Sometimes you're going to make the wrong decision, but if you're educated and you understand how to go about it, it makes things a little easier. You can't be afraid to say no.
Right, right. And you know, to piggyback that, you know, to go back to it, Coach Smart and I were just talking. Keith Smart, one of my mentors, who is now assistant coach with me, and he said, you know, Rosa Parks didn't have time to think about it. She had to make a decision. She made a decision to sit down on that bus and not get up. You know, and that's what it takes. You know, Muhammad Ali made a decision. Colin Kaepernick is making a decision. And he's not hurting anybody. He's not violent. He's not out in the streets looting. He's not doing anything. He's quietly protesting for equal rights.
Well, it's interesting because I think in a lot of ways it demonstrates how much he understands about the freedoms that we are afforded in this country to be able to protest in a non-violent manner, so that the flag and the anthem means something. And I think that that's really important for people to understand. You've both talked a little bit about mentors, and Pitt, I know you've had a mentor too. So I'd like to hear a little bit about the mentors that have been in your life and how important they are. Pitt, let's start with you.
Well, when you say that, I mean, the person that immediately comes to mind is Maxine Smith, you know, who, of course, you know, has been part of this museum since the inception. And of course, has been such a courageous leader in our community from the earliest days of the Civil Rights Movement. But it's really interesting, my first encounter with Maxine was in 1968, you know, right after well, probably within 3 or 4 months of the assassination. And of course, in that period, the pattern here in Memphis, and really in most cities around the country, is that, you know, you had so many different groups that trying to protest in so many different manners. And here in Memphis, you know, what they would typically do is they throw up a picket line in front of their neighborhood supermarket, because that was the quickest way to get impact and get news coverage. And at the time, you know, I was running Malone and Hyde at the right old age of 26, and we happened to have a 70% market share in Memphis. So inevitably, every store that got picketed was one of ours. So, and my only exposure to Maxine at that point was what I read in the newspaper. And of course, the Memphis newspaper at that time was very conservative indeed. And they sort of painted her as this revolutionary kind of person, you know. And so, you know, with fear and trepidation, I anticipated this meeting with Maxine. And so, to my surprise, she walks through the door, and here's this charming lady, you know, that is so gracious and all, and we sit down and we work out our few differences in like 5 minutes, you know. And then we were not only good friends from that day forward, but we worked together on trying to improve our community in any way we could. And so, you know, she was been one of my lifelong friends and such a great mentor. I mean, you know, Maxine and Vasco and of course Ben Hooks and Francis. I mean, we were so fortunate to have such terrific leaders in Memphis, and I considered it such a privilege to be a close friend of hers all those years.
Coach Fizzdale.
You heard it already. My grandfather, Robert Hamilton, was an incredible man. And I was lucky to have a man like that in my life, which obviously there's a lot of young men out here right now that's struggling, looking for mentorship from grown men in their community, fathers, grandfathers, guys like us. And my grandfather was a big-time community activist in LA. He was a sanitation worker his whole life. He fought for everyone in the community. He was a churchman, he was deacon at the church. And he just spent a lot of time with me, making me understand the importance of giving back, the importance of getting involved. Not just, if you ever make money, throw some money at it, because that's not real. That's dodging the problem. And he really, really hammered that into myself and my siblings. And so, you know, like I said, I was chomping at the bit to have an opportunity to start giving back in a way where I can utilize my platform. And so he was the guy. And obviously, you know, all of my coaches. I was lucky enough. I am still very close with my junior high coach. The guy that actually taught me how to shoot a jump shot is still a big part of my life. My high school coach, who was my second cousin, he was the one that actually broke down the riots to us. You know, when the riots were being announced in our spring league game, he sat us all down right there and just started explaining everything that was happening to us and how we should handle it and how we need to go about not putting ourselves in harm's way, but being very aware and understanding the power that we have as a collective group to impact, even if it's in a small way, our community. So I would say my coaches and my grandfather were probably the heaviest influences on me.
Vince?
And for me, it's tough for me to pick just one.
Right.
You know, my family, they're all just taught me how to go about, you know, how to do things the right way, and whatever that meant to you. Because sometimes when you go about doing the right thing, it doesn't appease to everyone.
Right.
And now, are you willing to hold your head up high and stick with that? Stick with your guns. So my family in general were like that. I got an opportunity to meet Andrew Young. It was random, and I ended up in a limousine just listening to stories of this and just listening to him talk. I mean, so I just tried to put myself around people who wanted to make a difference, but not to be in front of a camera, not for the recognition, for the better. And I would cling to people like that, and just to listen to their stories, and then I began to help my friends understand it. And now that's what they do. Now all of my friends are in positions, high school coaches, or jobs where they can make a difference. And it's just so many people. My high school coach was a history teacher, white guy, knows everything about black history that you would want to know. And that's how he would sit us down as well. We go through basketball, we would talk about history. He'd just break it down to us. Hey, he made sure, no, you're going to be in my class, but you're going to not sit in the back of the high. You're going to understand what it's about. So I really am thankful to just be in the position, because basketball has put me in a great position to make a difference for others and learn a lot.
Spotlight what are pretty dire consequences of institutional racism, poverty that has been left unchecked, failing schools, crumbling communities, too few living wage jobs in community, the institutional dismantling of family, and we've talked a lot about family and the importance of family, a war on drugs that kind of became a war on communities in many ways, and spiraling violence that really has gone hand in hand with all of these circumstances. So we got to figure out how we actually right this ship. And Pitt, I know you've done a lot of work and investing in education. You want to talk a little bit about how you think education plays into some of this?
Sure. Well, you know, Barbara and I have been working on K through 12 education reform for over 20 years at least. And, you know, it was a long, hard slog, but the thing that motivated us, and of course those early years, was a lot of work for little to show, because entrenched interests, the unions, the bureaucracy, the elected school board. And to me, it was such, I mean, it's such a fundamental civil right that every kid should have access to a quality education. And of course in Memphis, like most urban centers all over the country, kids get assigned to their neighborhood school that has been failing for 30 or 40 years, you know. And of course, I was so impacted by it constantly at AutoZone when we'd go to hire kids, and these kids would show up with high school diplomas and they couldn't fill out a job application. You know, and it's just tragic, because the one thing we've ever, you know, and we started with charter schools, and the reason charter is because we had flexibility to do things that we couldn't do in the system at large. And we were able to demonstrate in those schools that it was a myth that because kids came from poverty, you know, you couldn't expect them to learn up to much higher standards. So we were able to destroy that myth, and we continued to work. We never gave up on the system as a whole, so we worked on every piece of the system. And, you know, to me, it's the difference between being on a track of a life of dependency in the form of some kind of welfare support or in jail or something like that versus being a productive citizen. And you know, you can demonstrate through education, and to me, one of the biggest thrills is going to these classrooms where you got the right teacher, the right leadership, and see these bright minds, these kids learning at a level that's equal to anybody anywhere. Now, you can see their whole lives being transformed. So I think, yes, and the thing I'm most excited about is Memphis today is on the leading edge of education reform, and we're making huge gains and strides. You know, the national norm, the NAEP test, a year and a half ago, it showed that Tennessee made the greatest gains of any state in the whole country. We still have a long way to go, but that took us from 46 to 32nd, which still isn't acceptable, but that's the biggest gain that's ever been done in a three-year period. So we're excited, and all the rules have been changed. You know, you can hold people for, I mean, it's all geared towards student outcomes and holding people accountable for results. And you know, you gotta maintain one standard for all kids and keep everybody's feet to the fire until we achieve those standards. So yeah, it's very exciting, and I think it's something in Memphis that everybody should take pride in and really get engaged, because there's so many opportunities to help, because we still have a tremendous amount of work to do.
Vince, I know that your mother was an educator, and you're an advocate for more and better educational opportunities for students of color, and in fact that you adopted the young men of Grizz Prep last year. Do you believe we are dealing with a boys' crisis in our African American communities?
I think Grizz Prep is one of the best things ever created for young black men, young kids in general. But I mean, and I think, and I said it last year, that teams around the league need to learn and ask questions, because what that has done, and just getting the opportunity to talk to some of these young kids, and I asked them questions. I asked them, you know, now that you're in the school, how do you see education? How do you see life? And he's like, it saved my life. It helped me learn it and want to do better and want to make a difference in my community. So, and that's what I'm all about. Yeah, my entire family, every last one of them, my first cousin on down, everybody are educators. They're all in the school system. And I think back to May 20th, 2001, Game 7 against the Philadelphia 76ers. I made a decision to graduate that day, to get my diploma, and still play in Game 7. Missed the game-winning shot also. I wanted to cap it off right. But my point for saying that is that I wanted, you know, it was the stand. We talk about being a student athlete, not an athlete student. Yes. And it was a free opportunity for the NBA to say, hey, we can piggyback. This is what we're talking about. We always talk about read to achieve. And becoming a student athlete. Well, I wanted to show it. I'm a real life athlete who still believes in a student athlete. All this money that's being made, oh, that's all well and good, but it can only last for so long. I didn't know I would sit here 19 years, going into my 19th year. I didn't know that. And I was very thankful for my family just being educators and teaching me the importance of that. And it's tough. We all want to go to schools at some point. It's like, oh, man, I have to go today. But the bigger picture is, what do you want to do with yourself? Do you just want to be what? Sometimes you ride around and you'll see people on the street, you see all the poverty, you see all the violence, and you get tired of it. So well, I can do something about it by making this difference. So I chose to graduate for the bigger picture, the bigger purpose. To this day, I tell my daughter, I let her see that video and hear all the backlash from it. Very, very disappointing, but at the same time, I believe it, I would do it again because it's the bigger picture. Yes, basketball, we entertain. We're fortunate enough to play this sport to make a lot of money, but we're also fortunate enough to be on this platform to help other kids understand, like, yeah, you can do this too. Yeah, you say, we look at it, we can't live in a 10 to 15 year period. We're all not fortunate enough to do that. What happens afterwards? Do you have a plan B? All these things that these athletes who want to become professional players don't think about. Well, I'm here to help you. I'm going to, hey, something to think about now. When I'm talking about my kids who are 6 years old, 7 years old. Yeah, let's think about it now. Let's think about it now. You might have the slightest idea, but now when you become this 16-year-old, this 17-year-old, going to college, college happens only that fast. We all know that. Right. Then what?
Right.
Where do you go from there? What if you don't make it in professional sports? Right. Then what? No, we don't think about that because we're great in our city, in our neighborhood, in our county, our state. But there's also 50 or more better somewhere else. Exactly. So you have to compete. But what if you don't make it? Yeah. That's what the things are like. Yeah, you're great, but what if you don't make it? Where do you go from there? Are you willing to persevere?
And I really do think that education is the way. It is the path. But Pitt, you make a good point because it's only a path if you have a quality school. It's only a path if you have a quality instructor. I see your hand. I got it. So let's talk a little bit about what's good. We've talked a lot about issues, and being relatively new to Memphis, one of the things that I have experienced is the energy that is Memphis. And it is, people say they get tired of hearing people talk about Memphis and the potential that Memphis has, but it does. It has tons of potential. It has tons of opportunity for growth. And I see transformation. I mean, just in the 2 years almost that I've been here, I'm amazed at some of the things that have changed over the course of that time. I'd like to ask if Director Rawlings will come up as a native Memphian and talk a little bit about, those good things that are happening in the city.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm not as good as the voice of the Grizzlies, but I can speak in the mic. But I think these gentlemen have captured what's good about Memphis. They've taken you on a history tour, history lesson, and talked about, what we need to do as individuals. So I think about when I read Diary of a River Town, how the city grows from the river, and all the things that Memphis has gone through, and I think back to the yellow fever epidemic, and how did we overcome that? And so people talk about challenges, and I say, well, have y'all really studied your history? And I'm so glad that we've talked about those things. So what's good about Memphis? Well, we'll start with the Civil Rights Museum, okay? And obviously I'm speaking to the Grizzlies mic, so I have to tell the Grizzlies, because, listen to Mr. Hyde talk about, vision of unifying the city. Giving people opportunity, diversity at the games. We think about the legacy of Martin Luther King, and those are the things I think about. When we talk about mentors, my father, Martin Luther King, and all the other men and women, that have helped get me to where I'm at. So what's good about Memphis is, you think about the birthplace of the blues and rock and roll. We think about Graceland. We think about the bridge. I got some familiarity with both of those. We think about all those things going on in the proximity of the place where Dr. King gave his life so a guy like me could be the police director. And I think it was so important that when Coach and was talking about that, that We live a legacy every day. I think that we have to make sure that we share that. You know, we were talking to probably 300 students at Westwood High School today about opportunity and about, are they thinking about the next step? Are they thinking about that the things they do today, the decisions they make will follow them the rest of their lives? Playtime is over. You're in high school. You'll look up and you'll be graduating going, oh my God, what am I gonna do now? Mother's kicking me out the house. What opportunities do I have, or what have I taken advantage of? So he talked about the education system. Yes, having those challenges, but having opportunity and bridging a path forward that gets us where we want to go. So when I think about Memphis, I think about a city that is on the river, almost like, you know, the ancient Egyptian civilization. So how did, you know, Egypt, you know, end up with grand pyramids that are still standing? So we have a pyramid, we have a Nile, we have opportunity. And so what's great about Memphis is that, you know, when I talk about Memphis, I talk about Calvin and Ruthie Rawlings, my mother and father. And I think about all the stories that, you know, my grandmother told about not being able to go to this restaurant and making sure that we speak the truth. And I think that if we stand on truth and we don't believe the hype, because I tell people I don't try to be popular, I just try to speak the truth. I don't care if I'm trending, I'm just going to try to do the right thing. And we have to change the conversation. Memphis is very well suited to do those things. I talked about, you know, music and history and food. You know, we all eat a lot in Memphis. So, you know, we can talk about barbecue and think about that people come here just to barbecue on the river. And we have great food, soul food, Mexican, Italian, you know, Chinese. I mean, we have all those things here in such a rich culture that we have to take advantage of and we have to promote. So when my friends come to town, I tell them, you have to do some things. You have to go to the Civil Rights Museum. I can ship you ribs. I can't ship you to the Civil Rights Museum. You know, you have to go to Graceland. You have to come to Bass Pro. You have to walk around and experience the culture. So that's what I think about Memphis. I think that we have so much opportunity. We just have to make sure we're willing to do the hard work to get there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will just sum up what we heard here, and there were a couple of themes. One, connect yourself to somebody who can help you help others. History is important. Never stop learning. Never stop being willing to ask questions. Also, be willing to sit down and listen to a different perspective, because you might find out you got a lot more in common than you think you do. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us this evening. I hope you all have enjoyed this part of the program.
Thank you, Director Rawlings.
Thank you for letting me see the mic.
Not a problem. Anytime, anytime. Terry, I need your assistance, and Vince, I need your help as well. Now, the National Civil Rights Museum, which is located here at the historic Lorraine Motel, will commemorate the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination with a year-long commemoration. It'll start with the launch of the uniform, which will be worn, as I said, for the first time for our King Day game against Chicago in January. The theme is MLK 50, Where Do We Go From Here? And the museum will partner with organizations like the Grizzlies and civil rights leaders around the country for a national observance. MLK 50 will include signature events and activities in tribute to Dr. King's legacy, especially emphasizing his focus during his final years, the elimination of poverty, the acquisition of better jobs with higher wages, decent housing, quality education, justice, and most importantly, nonviolence as a method of achieving positive social change today. All of this will lead to a culminating commemoration on April the 4th, 2018 here at the National Civil Rights Museum to mark the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. With that, I would like to present to you the MLK 50 jersey. This jersey will be worn for the first time at our MLK celebration game January the 15th against Chicago. It will also be worn during various games during Black History Month. Now, this uniform design was done in cooperation with Adidas, and it was inspired by the museum and the historic Lorraine Motel. The uniform has used some iconic imagery, color, and design that will bring greater awareness to the museum and drive a deeper understanding of Dr. King's heritage, his life, and what he did in the civil rights movement. You notice that the uniform color is black. It is understated and respectful of the moment and the movement inspired by Dr. King, and it is obviously a departure from our traditional 3 shades of blue and gold. You notice the Memphis word mark. It showcases a marriage of the Lorraine Motel sign on the south side of the building and the Grizzlies' distinctive inline typeface. If you look on the side of the jersey, and yep, you want to go ahead and model that? Thank you.
Maybe the Vanna White.
There you go. That piping design is evocative of the railing surrounding the exterior walkways and the balconies surrounding rooms 306 and 307. The seafoam color accents are taken, obviously, from the doors of room 306 and 307, where Dr. King spent the final hours of his life, the evening of April the 4th, 1968. You will notice at the neckline that there is a wreath, and that is designed to represent the wreath that hangs where Dr. King was slain, and the place above the heart to remind us of his sacrifice and his continual work for social justice, the work that it is now our legacy to carry on. As I said, this uniform will be worn for the first time January the 15th when the Grizzlies take on the Bulls at FedEx Forum. This uniform, and notice also at the bottom what they call in the business the jock tag, MLK 50. So this uniform and other inspired apparel will be available for sale in the Grizzlies Den by Adidas starting January the 1st to tip off our Martin Luther King Jr. annual celebration. As Pitt alluded to earlier, the game is not on King Day, but we will expand our celebration. We will still have the symposium. We will still have the high school basketball game at FedEx Forum. We will still have a reception here at the National Civil Rights Museum and a conversation on the intersection of race and sports. And we'll also have a Martin Luther King Jr. NBA Youth Tournament. So even though the game is not on the day itself, we will use that day, as Coach Fizz says, we will use it for service. We'll get our hands dirty after we beat the Bulls on Sunday night. It is the only nationally televised NBA game on that day. The jerseys will debut, and the NBA world and the country at large will know what Memphis stands for. That this is so vital a spot to the history of human rights, and we will continue to immortalize Dr. King's legacy. So we appreciate your being here. We hope that the words of our panelists can be a springboard for those of you in the auditorium or those of you watching on Grizzlies.com to, as Coach Fizz says, get your hands dirty, become involved, make a difference in your community. It doesn't have to be large, it doesn't have to be a big check. It just has to be you being concerned, being educated, and being active. So again, thank you all very much for coming. And we will see you again.